Hi friends, it's Rachel at Original Moxie. I'm a self-taught formulator. I learned to make all of my products myself by doing my own research. And I know how difficult it can be to read an ingredient label on a product. Partly because I am not a chemist by training, and so I can identify with how bewildering it can be when you see all of these different words, some of which are completely unfamiliar, and then trying to make a judgment as far as whether that product is good to use, whether it's right for your hair. It's a lot of information. I was actually recently requested by one of our salon partners to make a short video explaining how to read an ingredient label, and I thought that was a brilliant idea. So I'm going to try to break it down into chunks. It's going to be a couple different parts because as much as I would like to make it super simple and something I could tell you in like 3 minutes or less, ingredient labels are complicated. So I'm going to have several different parts where I kind of cover the different aspects of an ingredient label, and that way the information won't seem so overwhelming and all at once. So let's get started with the basics. One important thing to know about labels for cosmetics that are manufactured here in the United States is that they are governed by rules that are established by the Food and Drug Administration. And so those guidelines are what determine a lot of major aspects of how an ingredient label is formatted, even the size of the font. So it's best to sort of start there before we get into specific ingredients and whether they're good or bad. One thing to remember, one of the main things to remember, is that the FDA requires that ingredients be listed in order of predominance, descending order of predominance. So that sounds complicated. What it actually means is that the higher the percentages of a particular ingredient, the closer it should be to the top of the label. And the lesser the amount of an ingredient, the closer it should be to the bottom of the label. So this is one reason why you will see that aqua, which is the Latin name for water, is usually the first ingredient that's listed on most hair care products, because by percentage, usually by a large margin, that is the most predominant and the biggest amount of the ingredient that is in that product. However, there are exceptions to this rule, and the exceptions are really interesting and important to know about. I'm actually going to read a little bit from the FDA's website, and then I'm going to break it down for you as far as what that means. Okay, let's get into it. Exception number 1. If the cosmetic is also a drug, Section 502C of the FD&C Act requires that the active drug ingredients be declared before declaration of the cosmetic ingredients. A declaration thus would read as follows: active ingredient, name of drug ingredient. Other, or cosmetic ingredients, names of cosmetic ingredients in descending order. Where you will see active ingredients listed is on products that make specific claims about treating a specific condition. For example, a dandruff shampoo. If a product claims that it is a treatment for a diagnosable condition such as dandruff, then they must list the active ingredients. In general, those products are going to be tested in a lab to determine efficacy and certain standards. And so you won't see that on products that are not making specific claims about specific conditions. We do not do that with most of our products, or with all of our products currently. We tend to instead highlight benefits that are more generalized. For example, anti-inflammatory, soothing, moisturizing, that sort of thing. Those claims are not considered medicinal, and it does not classify that product as a drug. So it's kind of an interesting distinction, because even though a product might have very similar ingredients to a not drug cosmetic product, it's really kind of based on the decision of the manufacturer as far as how they want to market that drug. So if they want to market that product as a drug, then they do need to list an active ingredient. All right, exception number 2. Ingredients present at a concentration not exceeding 1% may be listed in any order after the listing of the ingredients present at more than 1% in descending order of predominance. Okay, so remember how we said that the more ingredients there are, the closer they should be to, the more of an ingredient there is, the closer it should be to the top of the ingredient list. If there is less than 1% of that ingredient in the product, it can be listed in any order after the order of predominance ingredients are listed. So in other words, if you have multiple ingredients and they are all less than 1%, you can basically jumble them up and put them in whatever order you prefer after the ingredients that are above 1% on the label. Usually the types of ingredients in this category are highly concentrated and very potent. So what you will normally see in a less than 1% category is something like fragrance, essential oils, and preservatives. Those are kind of the most common ones. Sometimes it's also pH adjusters like citric acid. So things that you just need a little bit of, again, less than 1%, would be in that category. And so, for example, on our labels, we do list all of the essential oils, even though they are uniformly all less than 1% of the product. My stylistic preference is just to list them alphabetically. So normally when we get to that point on the label, you will see that we have the essential oils listed in order of just the alphabet. So not a whole lot of complex information there. Again, doesn't tell you anything about like which one there's more of in a particular formula. Exception number 3, color additives of any concentration may be listed in any order after the listing of the ingredients which are not color additives. This sounds really boring and benign, but actually it's one of the ones that I feel is a little bit more controversial because this applies to hair dyes. So we're not talking about just something like a pigment that you're adding to a product to change the color of the product and that's not actually imparting any color to the hair. We're also including permanent hair dyes in that category. The FDA considers a color additive to be anything from a pigment that changes the color of the product to something that actually deposits color onto the hair. That's an important thing to think about when you're considering a hair color line. The hair color in particular, we're talking about mostly permanent hair color. For darker pigments in particular, can contain some chemicals that have been associated with serious health concerns like cancer. PPD and resorcinol are two that you may have heard about, and those do need to be listed on the ingredients, and they are considered color additives. However, you have no way of knowing how much is in that particular product. So in my opinion, that's where it's really important to trust the manufacturer that you're working with, because generally on their websites, they will say, you know, less than a certain percentage of that or only in these colors. But you really have to kind of take their word for that. Okay, exception number 4. This is the last one. Name of an ingredient accepted by FDA in accordance with the procedure established in 720.8 as a trade secret need not be disclosed on the label. In lieu of declaring the name of that ingredient, the phrase "and other ingredients" may be used at the end of the ingredient declaration. This is another important one to pay attention to because where this is often invoked is on ingredients that are fragrance related. A lot of brands consider fragrances to be trade secrets. Understandable, because very often the scent of a product is sort of considered part of its character. However, because most companies are still using synthetic fragrances, which include a lot of chemicals, one fragrance may have hundreds, maybe even more, of individual chemicals that go into making that fragrance. And they don't have to list any of them. And sometimes those individual chemicals are also associated with health concerns, endocrine disrupting, allergies, skin rashes, stuff like that. So if you see just a blanket fragrance and other ingredients, that is a red flag that there are undisclosed chemicals, most likely, in that product, and there is no way of knowing exactly what they are. One tip that I have learned over the years is that if you pick up a product and you're trying it out for the first time, or maybe you're just shopping and you smell something that smells like fruit, like strawberry, really strongly, or coconut or pineapple or any sort of edible sort of fragrance, vanilla being the one exception because that is possible to get a strong vanilla fragrance just from a vanilla extract. Probably that has an artificial fragrance that's imparting that aroma to it. there is no way to naturally derive those fragrances from a natural ingredient. So that means it's a synthetic compound that is mimicking the smell, or at least the smell that humans like to think about or associate with that ingredient, because really coconuts don't have that strong of a smell. So if you're smelling something like that and it smells really strong in particular, that's a sign that there is definitely a synthetic fragrance in there, and it may not be disclosed. In fact, the brand may say that it's all natural. And that is kind of a pet peeve of mine, because a lot of major manufacturers get away with that, and most people don't know that. They can't detect the difference between a natural fragrance and an artificial fragrance. And so it's really, to me, kind of seems like you're intentionally trying to put one over on consumers. So we do not do that on our products. We list every single essential oil, as I mentioned, usually just alphabetically, because they are less than 1% of the product, but there are no ingredients in our product that are not listed. And the only things that are going to be not in order of predominance is that essential oil category. Everything else, including preservatives, are going to be listed in order of predominance. Again, it's a good reason to work with brands that you trust and that are really transparent in terms of the information they're sharing, because there's a lot that is actually legal for companies not to disclose. So that's why I felt like this was an important segment to start with, is just you kind of know what you're working with in terms of how reliable the information is on an ingredient label. So I hope that's helpful, and we'll do another segment. We'll get into how to interpret the actual names of the ingredients, and that'll be the next chapter that I dive into. Hope this was helpful, and we'll see you guys soon.